Okay, nice to see you again, Francis.
Yeah, you too, Ave. Great to see you.
It's been really lovely, actually, that we've sort of connected and found one another. And I thank you for sending your paper over, Exploring Whiteness in the Context of Anti-Racist Practice, which I read. I mean, it's so rich. And what I was thinking today was how just sincere, that
Mm.
was. So I just wanted to say that I know it's not an easy task, and I have spent quite a lot of years talking about racism within psychotherapy practice. To an extent, I'm a little bit tired of talking about it and thinking about it. So
Sure.
I know it's a big thing. It's a big issue, and it's something that I guess once you're engaged in it, it's sort of a very visceral, if you like, sensation.
Yes, absolutely. It's a whole body experience, I think, isn't it, when we come into to have race conversations.
Mm,
And I think especially for white people who have been conditioned to not even see themselves as being white or being conditioned to kind of have almost a racelessness identity. And so when we first start to engage in these conversations, we find it a bit destabilizing and our nervous systems get all, and that still happens.
mm.
Even though I've been doing some work on this, I expect that
We got dropped out. I expect that.
I expect to feel, of course I'm going to feel uncomfortable. Of course I am.
Mm,
But in many ways, that's a privilege too. That's very different to, I don't experience racism as a white person. I have that privilege. I live that privilege of as being a benefactor of racism. So to feel some discomfort is a small price to pay, I think.
mm.
Um,
Well, it's interesting you should talk about discomfort. Of course, there's sort of different types of discomfort that goes on. But I also remember when I was talking, I gave a talk at a conference. I was doing a workshop, and it was just mostly white clients, students, trainees, as well as professionals. And I had a sense of discomfort, almost as if I was, just in sort of unknown territories, who's got my back in this space, and
mm,
how am I being welcomed, and am I going to be offending? So I think there is discomfort on both ends.
yeah.
But one of the things I liked about your paper is the honesty and the openness. And, the fact that we both see, and I guess a lot more people would appreciate the fact that we can't carry on in a way. I mean, we could, but in terms of what our training is trying to do, which is the psychoanalytic perspective, is to create awareness. So what then happens, when this awareness is brought to the fore? We
Sure.
can't then pretend as if, we're because then it's almost as if we're doing the training a disservice, and we're doing the people that come to see us a disservice.
Absolutely. And I think if we're claiming to be the profession that can speak about this, can have some level of expertise on identity and what identity means, then we can no longer, for white people, can no longer keep quiet about this. Because I think for many years within the profession, we've lived in a way where we've always presumed that race and racism was the problem, somebody else's problem,
Mm,
the problems that black and brown people experience. We've never until recently made the link to the other half of the equation, which is whiteness and white systems and white identities. So I think we've got a lot of work to do.
there is a lot of work to do. I do agree with that, and I think it's going to be quite a lengthy process. But I thought maybe for the purpose of our talk here, I'm not sure whether we should. I was just thinking maybe we should actually sort of talk about what we mean when we say white and what we mean when we say whiteness for
Yeah.
people who are listening, because there is quite a difference, isn't there? And I'd let you talk about that, Francis. if that's
Well,
it.
what I would say, just to sort of keep it succinct, but also white systems, whiteness as an ideology, as a ways of thinking and ways of being and ways of knowing. So it's kind of the broader systemic, often referred to as white supremacy culture. And so I was looking at both these things, what it means to have a white identity, and then this broader. So I mean, you might be not thinking of them in that way, but I was thinking of whiteness in those ways, really.
As a system.
As a system and a structure.
But let's see what we can do, because
Yeah,
I
we
think
might
it's
have
important just
bits.
to get out what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, I see it. I do also see it as a structure and system because, for me, I have lived here sort of more than half of my life now. We're talking over 20 years. And,
Okay, yeah.
when we talked before, and I mentioned something about a lot of my friends are white, and I actually also feel very sort of discomfort with the term white and black, because at the end of the day, what does it mean, really?
It's
To say
meaningless,
somebody is
isn't it?
white or somebody is black doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that you can identify with them. For most of us, I guess we're wanting to be able to connect with whosoever. Now, so I guess I'm sort of saying those terms in itself, they're just polar opposites or not, but they're made to seem as if they are. So in itself, it's meaningless. But what I was actually sort of thinking of is the fact that whiteness within, as a system, as a structure, it's really hard to know enough about it to be able to, I feel, bring about change. I mean, of course, when I was listening to your talk as a white person, there would be things that just by association, I guess. But are we trying to, in a way, dismantle the system?
I think there's so much, what's the word, paradox in this, isn't there? There's so much, as soon as we enter into these conversations, there's so much contradiction. But I think, yes, we are. I think we've got to do that, because...
Are we talking about within psychotherapy as well? I
Yes,
wonder, because it's
yes.
quite there is the training, and then there is the wider issue.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're not fit for purpose, because we are so almost exclusively white. I know there are many more black and brown colleagues coming into the profession, but that's not how it is at the moment. It's not a level playing field. There's a lot of inequity, and there's a lot of harm being done, albeit unintentional. And so I think when you ask me, are we trying to dismantle that? I think we are. I think we're trying to dismantle it as a system and as a structure that permeates psychotherapy, I guess, and counselling training, from the leaders at the top, the professional bodies, all the organisations. They're all white dominated, and we really need to start to dialogue about that. And we need commitment from all levels, I think. Essentially, I think the dismantling has got to start at the top, with the heads, the leaders, the professors, the chief executives. I think unless we have, their commitment, I don't think it's enough to just do it when we talk about the training sort of education spaces and taking those ideas into classrooms. And that's important, but it's got to come at every level.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether you have thoughts on that.
I often feel that with any system, it's really hard to know how the system operates. And even if we know enough about it, I think sometimes the question really becomes, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? I appreciate that, of course, that's, a major part of your work and thinking. But I'm also wondering whether with what we have and what we know, maybe sort of just keeping it within psychotherapy, I don't know, for a part of me is very optimistic that, if we can get it right within our training, then maybe we can roll it up, because there's something about that level of awareness that can be helpful, in bringing about or bringing onto the training different types of people that hopefully can also, as opposed to the responsibility lying strictly with the individual, which to some extent it does. But the individual can, we can attract more people, and hopefully that can in itself begin to be part of the change we want. Because I guess the point I'm trying to make, it's such a big task. I'm thinking maybe we need to break it down. So when we think about our training, particularly, I was going to ask you. So I know you've talked quite a bit about, the issues within the training, and your research focused on what experiences. Of course, correct me. The people that you based your research on and their experiences of the training. And it's interesting because a lot of the people that come to me, Black clients, say exactly that the training is not being put together with their experience, with their identity, with their thoughts in mind. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And one of the findings of the research, when I listened again and revisited the transcripts from and the recordings from the interviews, each member of colleague of the global majority that I interviewed, they all experienced whiteness as violence in various ways. And one of the ones that I named was epistemological violence. So the violence of erasure, of the experience of Black and brown colleagues in education spaces, was that their knowledge and their whole life experience of their version of the truth and their version of mental health and their version of emotion just wasn't seen. It wasn't part. It was just it's a very Eurocentric. There is a version of what good therapy is, and it's a white version. And that, when I looked at what was being said to me, that was coming across as a form of violence. To not be seen and to not be heard. The power of that was not only a haunting from the past, but it was like a repatterning in the training itself. And the experience, I think, is that white trainers just do not have the awareness to know the harm that they are doing.
That they're bringing. Yeah, I hear you. So when you use the word violence, I was thinking also of oppression. It's quite oppressive, isn't it? And I wonder,
Absolutely.
because violence, I think sometimes people do not want to be seen as being racist, clearly, or as being hateful or mean.
Yeah.
So without kind of, protecting white fragility, I think we need to be using the languages, because to some extent, you've done the research and that's what you felt it was. So there is validity in using those terms.
Yes. Absolutely. That is really ever talked about in psychotherapy. It feels a million miles away from what we think about therapy is. But it was also much more explicit than that as well. It literally was examples of violent reenactments of people being excluded, these sorts of things. So that was why I named it violence, because of the harm it was doing.
And it does do harm, because, people can go through a training, to learn about themselves, only to come out of it sort of even more traumatized, which seems, to defeat the whole object.
Absolutely. It's a complete contradiction, isn't it? And I've heard that since, when people share things with me, and they do, that there's a feeling of just having to keep your head down and get through the training and almost have to kind of bite your lip and dissociate and just look forward to the day when you can remodel it for yourself. That's a story that a narrative that I hear.
And I've heard that story as well.
Yeah.
It's tricky. So I just wanted to sort of ask, as we're on this particular topic, what do you think the next necessary step is for shifting whiteness in psychotherapy education?
Well, I think whiteness has to be worked on those two levels, on the identity level. So there's work for every white person to do. And that's not to say that there isn't also internal work for Black and brown colleagues to do as well, if they're holding internal.
Are those separate work, or do you think that it's something about whiteness that you're talking about?
I think there is scope for both, and for groups to work together, but there is more risk with that of re-traumatizing Black and brown colleagues. But I think there's definite work to do in affinity groups.
So that's a mixed group, is that what you
So
mean?
affinity groups are where white people. So, for example, a white affinity group is a group of white people specifically working to excavate their own conditioned racism,
Right.
to prepare them and to give to try and develop some skills so they do less harm in the company of black and brown colleagues. That's how I
Right.
would see it. That's the main aim of it.
And in a way, we have to be able to protect its circumferences, because if we can get it right in the training, we can't expect everybody out there to be doing the same, because, the training offers us something, doesn't it? That actually, we need to look at reflect on our own being and on our own behavior. So that's where you're coming from. That's where we're coming from. Just like Black people need to reflect on their own internalized racism, which I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
is slightly different. But I often feel that there is something about take what works, because
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
yeah, because to some extent, when I mentioned earlier on that I was sort of raised here, and I have lived in other cultures. I was born in Nigeria, and I think that's just to a large extent has been an advantage, because my formative years, up until I was about 12, was spent there, where I never had to think about my color. Of course, there's issues around shadism going on, but
Oh,
it wasn't in the same way. I was just getting on with life and having the general challenges that, 10, 11-year-old would be having.
mm,
It wasn't until I came to the UK that I kind of just thought, oh, hang on a minute, people seem to have some problems with how I speak or how I look. So that then became something but the point I'm trying to make here is that I think there is something about having something of another belonging, even though this is my home. This is where most of my formative years has been, my training has been. And I would like to think that there are other people. Well, of course, there are other people, and there are other people that are born here that do not have anywhere else to call home. So, this idea that all this Black people, all these immigrants who are causing on brown people who are the problem, they're not going to go away. There's
no,
nowhere to go. Neither should they
absolutely.
be made to feel they need to go away. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we have to embrace one another,
Yes, we certainly do. We certainly do.
because I can't see any other way around it.
No, absolutely. And that's why I'm not too concrete about how the work should happen. I don't know how the work should happen, but I know it has to. And so there has to be many different ways. There has to be many different types of groups and many different sizes of groups. And some of them may, I think we've got to start where we're at. And so I think our dialogue that we're developing is huge, is as important as any affinity group or whatever you want to call it. But I think you asked me, how do I see, this work of whiteness? And I think, so it's work on the identity side of things, but it's work on the structural as well. And I think that's my point about we must have commitment from the top. Until we have that, I think it's going to be very, very slow. And I think culture change takes time, but I think it is changing. And I heard what I thought was a real kind of picked up on a real sense of hope from what you were saying earlier, when you were saying that, diversity is hugely rich and it's hugely productive. It can be. And I think that's a huge part of the way forward. It isn't all about whiteness, because the risk there is centering whiteness. It is about black and brown colleagues taking the lead and white individuals and groups knowing when to step aside and
Right.
to act
Yes.
as advocates and supports, to know when
Yes.
to get out of the way. So I think the change will come through both, but through particularly black and brown organizations taking a lead and deciding what they want.
Yes, and I hear that. I mean, Maya Angelou said an interesting thing, which is, your silence wouldn't save you, which, for a lot of Black and brown people, well, Black people, well, I can only speak for Black people actually in this instance, is the sense that they don't feel, for various reasons within groups, feeling marginalized, feeling that they can't speak out, feeling the imposter syndrome, it's really hard sometimes to feel safe, to feel that you can speak up. But what I have often said, and I do say this in my practice to clients, is exactly that. You do need to speak up. I know sometimes it's difficult, but it's actually really important that you get your voice out there. The reason being, I always feel that those people who want to hear you would hear you. Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe the project shouldn't be that we're going to kind of try and change everybody, because that's going to be a big task.
Yes.
It's an impossible task. But those that want to hear and those that would listen,
Yes, absolutely.
we can get, we're really only just trying to attract people that would want to change and want to know about this and they want to bring about some change.
I completely agree with you, Abby, that we've kind of got to work with those willing to work with us to start off with, haven't we? And, where we feel heard, we've got to really go with that, and we've got to chase those people and really commit to sticking with them. That's the piece about finding your people. And I feel there's been a kind of a change recently in that quite a few people seem to be getting more galvanized to do this work, and there's a lot of energy.
Well, that's really great.
Still happening. It isn't necessarily in the circles that I've been privy to with people. I think there's a lot of energy to keep going. There isn't necessarily, because I know after the racist murder of George Floyd that there was a lot of white people making a lot of noise about this, but then the feeling of it dropping off.
It's awareness, isn't it? Sorry to interject.
Yes, absolutely. It's awareness, it's commitment, it's accountability. As a white person to black and brown people, and keeping going. I think that's what it is. I don't think there's any end. There's no end
that's the thing.
We just have to keep doing. Yeah.
Yes, and keep, because I think it falls out of consciousness.
Yes. Yes, it does. It really does. And I own that. And, whiteness will always seek comfort. We'll want to deny racism.
There's something about the status quo, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
I do get that.
Yeah.
I really do understand that. But I think if we kind of think, as we've been talking about, that this actually happens at the expense of others, that I guess to some extent, I guess it's about creating awareness that actually, if you take so much space, then somebody else perhaps doesn't have that space.
Exactly. You're absolutely
especially when you're in a group, particularly within the training. I think, people may make assumptions, but we're kind of coming to the end now. And I'm just thinking that, this is not strictly about black and brown people. I think it's something it's no surprise that, often people, the religious background or the LGBTQ community or black and brown people are the ones that do drop out of the training. So, there is something, isn't there, around the Eurocentric approach. There's something in there that the training itself is not embracing difference in the way it could do.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've just not kept, as a profession, white-dominated psychotherapy we haven't kept up with that. And so there's a lot to do.
Thank you, Frances. I appreciate you. I wanted to let you know that.
It's great talking to you.
And you.